Good afternoon, and welcome to the live stream of the Thomas R. Pickering Foreign Affairs Fellowship Program. My name is Lily Lopez McGee, and I currently serve as the director for the program. I realized that there was a little bit of an issue with timing with this particular webinar. We did have it listed incorrectly in a couple of different places, so I apologize for the confusion and appreciate those of you who are able to still join with us in speaking today about for the Pickering program. So I will go ahead and get started with today's presentation. The chat box is located to the right-hand side of the screen. Please feel free to chat in your questions at any point during the webinar. Again, if you are experiencing any technical issues, please feel free to chat that in as well so that we can address those as they come along. All right. All right, so we will start with just a little overview of what today's presentation will entail. Today we'll be covering everything about the Pickering program. We'll talk about the graduate fellowship, what it is that is involved with the application process, the benefits of the program, how to apply, and go over a little bit about what is involved with being a Foreign Service officer with the Department of State. So we'll start with a broad overview of the program. The Pickering Graduate Fellowship Program is a State Department funded grant administered by Howard University in Washington, D.C. The program is a graduate level fellowship targeted at graduating seniors and those who have already completed their undergraduate studies. The program provides up to $37,500 in funding for each year towards a 2-year graduate program at a U.S.-based institution in an area of relevance for the Foreign Service. The way that funding shakes out is it is $21,500 towards tuition and mandatory fees, and $16,000 towards stipend. The stipend does go directly to the fellow, and the tuition goes to the institutions. And I'll break down a little bit more about what the benefits look like. But I did want to spend just a second here talking about what types of programs it is that we fund. The Pickering program will fund master's degrees that are in an area of relevance to the Foreign Service. So these types of programs include a master's in business administration, international affairs, public policy, regional studies, linguistics. Anything that will essentially position the fellows to be better suited to enter the Foreign Service, better prepared to enter the Foreign Service. So we really are looking at programs that are in line with developing general skills along the lines of policy analysis, quantitative skills, economics, those types of things. The institutions do have to be based in the U.S. They do have to be U.S.-based institutions. There are a couple of exceptions where we'll fund programs such as Johns Hopkins SAIS, the School of Advanced International Studies, that has a program that does 1 year in Washington, D.C., and then 1 year overseas, either at their Bologna campus or in China. Those are the exceptions. Most generally, we're looking at U.S.-based institutions. Again, because it's a State Department funded grant, the funding does need to benefit the United States as well. A little bit about what you can expect as a fellow. Our fellows receive an in-depth week-long orientation into the Foreign Service. During the summer, before they start their graduate program, we will fly everyone out to Washington, D.C. To spend a week in mid-June at the State Department, learning about what it's like to be a Foreign Service officer, and really starting to go through those clearance processes. And I'll talk about clearances in just a moment on a separate slide. In addition to the orientation, we also provide 2 internship experiences. One is a domestic internship in Washington, D.C. at the Department of State. Our fellows serve in regional and functional bureaus. They serve essentially as entry-level Foreign Service officers, working in offices right next to Foreign Service officers, doing the work of Foreign Service officers, because these are really opportunities to get a sense of how the Department of State functions and what its role is in implementing foreign policy. The DC experience is really important because as most Foreign Service officers spend the majority of their time overseas, it is helpful to get a sense for how the department functions in the DC area. In addition to the 10-week internship at the State Department, there is also a 10-week overseas internship. This internship takes place after the fellows have completed their graduate degree. They serve in consulates, embassies all over the world, and again, are really placed in a position where they are doing the work of Foreign Service officers. And this is really to give our fellows a clear idea of an expectation for what it is that the type of career that they are going into. In addition to the formal components of the program, we also provide fellows with a senior Foreign Service officer mentor, as well as a program sponsor. And the program sponsor, what makes the distinction between the mentor and the sponsors, that the mentor is someone who's been in the department for a long time, who can really provide some guidance on long-term what a career in the Foreign Service is like, and can provide guidance on what to expect, how to plan and how to prepare, and that kind of thing. The sponsor is really someone who's a little bit earlier on in their career. This is often a Pickering fellow, who will be able to provide some guidance in what it's like to be a Pickering fellow, what to experience, what types of things to look for in overseas and domestic internships. So it's the really core to the experience as a Pickering fellow is the mentorship. And then at the end of the program, our fellows enter the Foreign Service after they've completed their graduate degree, and upon successfully completing the entry requirements in accordance with applicable law and State Department policy, our fellows will enter the Foreign Service as Foreign Service officers. They generally begin their entry to the Foreign Service with the fall A100 class. For this next cohort of fellows, our fellows will be entering the fall 2021 Foreign Service officer class. So some of the benefits, I mentioned these a little bit briefly, but I did want to go into greater detail about what this looked like. So the program will provide $21,500 towards tuition and mandatory fees, and then per year for the 2-year master's program, these funds are directly issued to the institution. In addition to the $21,500, our fellows also receive a $16,000 living stipend that goes directly to them. In addition to the funding that our fellows receive, there are often graduate programs that provide additional supplemental financial assistance. So I'm sure many of you have gone onto our website to look at the partners list. We will, in the case that you're interested in looking at what those offers look like, what you can expect to receive if you say you apply to the University of California, San Diego, or Georgetown, just to compare, we are happy to send you the specific offers from the institutions in a separate document. So you can just email pickeringfellowship@howard.edu, and I can send that document over to you. I mentioned this briefly, but our fellows do receive quite a bit of professional development along the way during the course of their 2 years that they're with us. During the domestic internship in between your first and second year of graduate school, we do provide several professional development opportunities during that summer, doing sessions around developing group dynamics, public speaking skills, what it's like to be a Foreign Service officer in a particular region, a whole host of things. So our fellows are really gaining a clear understanding of what Foreign Service officers do, how the State Department is structured, and things of that nature. And then in addition to the funding support that we provide for the graduate studies, we also do provide up to $10,000 for each of the summer internships. This generally includes housing, a personal living stipend, and flights to and from either Washington, D.C. or the international location. I do see that there is a question about the types of programs that we fund. Does the program cover an MPH program, Master in Public Health? And then the second question is, if chosen, do we have to go right after finishing undergrad, or can this be delayed? So I'll tackle the first question first. We are not able to fund Masters in Public Health because the focus is too narrow. State Department Foreign Service officers, again, are very generalist. And I'll get into a little bit more about what the Foreign Service is like from the State Department side. Generally, if you're interested in the public health aspect and you're still very much interested in the State Department Foreign Service, what we've had folks do is utilize the funding to go to study, let's say, a master's in public policy or a master's in public administration with a concentration in public health. And there are certainly plenty of programs that do that, that offer that. The University of Washington, for example, the Evans School Master's of Public Administration covers you get an MPA, but you are able to do a global health focus for your concentration. But again, we're not able to cover the public health. I will mention a couple of other programs, including the Donald M. Payne Fellowship Program, that are structured very similarly to Pickering near the end of the presentation, that might be better suited if you are looking to go into more of the technical areas of study, such as health or agriculture or sustainability, those types of things. With regard to the second question about when you can apply, you can really apply anytime after you've graduated from undergrad. If you can also apply directly from undergrad, so you can apply during your senior year or your last year of your undergraduate studies. The primary requirement to applying to the program is that you are seeking graduate admissions for the fall of the following year. So our application this year is in September 20th, which is about 4 months earlier than in the past. I'll just make a note of that. So our application deadline is September 20th. You hear in November whether or not you've been awarded the fellowship, and then you would essentially wait another 9 months before you actually enter your graduate program. We do find that a lot of folks go out to work for a year or a few years after they've graduated. That helps in part because they're able to articulate more clearly why it is that they'd like to become a Foreign Service officer, but it's certainly not required. Again, you can apply during your senior year or anytime after you've completed your undergraduate program. So with great benefits also come obligations. There are a few things that I wanted to highlight here. I'll start with the security medical and suitability clearances. So all of our Foreign Service officers are required to obtain and maintain a medical and a top security clearance, as well as a suitability clearance. Many folks have heard about the security clearance and the medical clearance. Security clearance is, can you keep secrets? Are you able to work with top secret information without the possibility of sharing that information? The medical clearance is really related to, are you able to serve at any of our posts overseas? The State Department Foreign Service is located all throughout the world, at embassies and consulates in a number of places. If you have a disability or a chronic illness, that does not preclude you from receiving medical clearance. Part of the medical clearance process is just, again, to determine partially if you are able to manage whatever issue it is that you might have in a context outside of the United States. So not every country has the same level of healthcare or access to medical care that the United States has. So whatever your disability or your issue might be, are you able to manage it overseas? And even if you're not able to do that in every country, folks still are able to receive medical clearances. Again, kind of depending on what the issue might be, and you might just be limited to a region of the world, or limited from not going to a specific region, depending on what that is. So again, if you have a disability or chronic illness, that does not preclude you from receiving the clearance, and we would certainly encourage you to continue forward with your application if that is a concern. And we're happy to talk offline about what that looks like on a case-by-case basis also. With regard to suitability clearance, this is a clearance that is unique to State Department Foreign Service officers. Suitability is really looking at are you a good fit for the organization? So the Foreign Service officers are U.S. representatives of the U.S. federal government. They are on all the time. So they serve as diplomats in all over the world. And as a result of that, they are high profile, much more high profile than perhaps an American tourist who's just traveling for vacation purposes. In the case that something happens, let's say a car accident or something of that nature, the news headlines in the country will not necessarily read that this is an American does X, Y, and Z. It will read U.S. Government representative or U.S. diplomat is in a compromised situation. So the suitability clearance is really looking for match. In this area, we really do have to spend a little bit of time talking about use of drugs and a few other things that are sort of common issues that come up with suitability clearance. So I'll talk about the drugs first. There are certain recreational drugs that are now considered recreational in certain states. But whether or not you live in California or Oregon or Colorado or wherever it might be, the use of drugs like marijuana is still considered a federal offense. So the general rule of thumb, if you have used and you are currently using, stop using it immediately. And then within a year to 18 months, then come back apply for the program. So if you have used in the last year or so, definitely be mindful that this will be an issue in the clearance process, and you should consider maybe timing it out so that you will come back and apply later. This is often an issue that comes up. So we did want to spend some time talking about that. In addition to drug-related issues, another thing that often comes up is debt. Having debt in and of itself is not an issue. It's how it's managed. So frequency with which you might be defaulting on loans or unable to pay, credit card bills, those types of things, pattern of not being able to manage your financial situation could be an issue with suitability clearances. So again, if there are things going on right now that you think might pose a challenge to the suitability clearance, consider maybe holding off and applying a year or two down the line. And again, if you'd like to talk about a specific concern or question that you have about any of the three clearances, please feel free to give us a call or email us, and we're happy to talk to you on a case-by-case basis. Our fellows are also required to maintain a 3.2 GPA throughout the program. So if there is a requirement that you have to have a 3.2 GPA at the time of application, you're also required to maintain that throughout the course of your graduate studies. Now, if you, for whatever reason, one semester get a 3.0, for example, we will not immediately kick you out of the program. We'll put you on probation. We'll identify ways to help you with either studying more or getting you some assistance on campus so that you are able to maintain that 3.2 GPA. In addition to those requirements, our fellows are also required to meet the State Department Foreign Service entry requirements. So our fellows do have to take the Foreign Service Officer written exam, and they also have to take and pass the Foreign Service Officer oral assessment. And all along the way, we are providing support in preparing for the oral assessment. So our fellows do receive, again, mentorship with a senior foreign service officer and additional professional development opportunities to explore what set expectations for what the foreign service officer oral assessment entails. And then in addition to meeting these requirements, our fellows are also required to fulfill a 5-year service obligation. So at the time that you begin A100 is when the 5-year service obligation begins. So in total, our fellows would be spending approximately 7 years with us, 2 years in the graduate program, and then an additional 5 years in their service obligations. That said, I will say that 5 years blows by. Many of our fellows are still in the service and very much interested in continuing on with their experience. I'm going to take just a quick second to answer a question that someone's typed in. Is deferring acceptance for a Fulbright fellowship possible, or would it be required to reapply the following year? No, Fulbright is actually one of the few clear reasons, I'll say clear and cut reasons why we would allow for a deferral. Generally, because of the timing of our application, you would not know whether or not you'd been admitted to the Fulbright program until maybe February or March of the following year. And we will work with fellows in the case that they are accepted to the Fulbright program to defer their entrance into the Pickering program until the following year. And I don't think that I addressed the full question about oh no, something different. But yes, so you are allowed to defer for Fulbright. Other reasons that fellows might defer, sometimes there's a medical or family issue that comes up. Those are also considered, or let's say you have to fulfill requirements for another federal program that you're completing. We have lots of people who apply to the Peace Corps, from the Peace Corps, who apply to our program. And let's say they have a service obligation that goes through the time that they would be with the Pickering program. We would also look at that on a case-by-case basis to make sure that they're meeting their obligations to the other program as well. So a little bit about the Foreign Service. We don't like to assume that everybody knows everything about the Foreign Service, and it's helpful to know what you're applying to. So as I mentioned, Pickering Fellows ultimately go on to become Foreign Service officers, and Foreign Service officers are the folks who really staff the embassies and consulates overseas and also work on foreign policy here stateside. They lead America's foreign policy in a number of ways in enacting diplomatic efforts, advocacy, and foreign assistance all around the world. They are also the ones who are out in the world advancing U.S. interests, the interests of the American people. And the important thing to know about the Foreign Service is it is a really exciting and rewarding career. There's no one position that will keep you doing the same thing every day or even every week. Our Foreign Service officers often tell us that one of the exciting parts about the career is that they're constantly doing different things. They're constantly growing and learning professionally. Being able to take on new tasks and new projects all along the way is part of the benefit of the program. If you are, I think the director of our program had mentioned the intellectual restlessness. If you are always constantly looking for doing something different, this is definitely the career for you. And I will kind of leave it at that. If you do have specific questions about what Foreign Service officers do and the 5 career tracks, I can also cover that and talk a little bit more about what the specific career tracks entail. I'm going to pause just for a second because we did have another question about deferrals and deferring for the language. I think you might be, the student might be talking about the Foreign Language and Area Studies language program. And that depends. Many of the FLAS fellowship opportunities actually coincide and require graduate or enrollment in school. So we would look at that on kind of a case-by-case basis to determine how that would influence your position with the Pickering program. If you, let's say, for example, you are doing a FLAS fellowship program and you won't confer your undergraduate degree until after most of our fellows would have already started the program next fall, 2019. I would encourage you to apply for the next cycle because you will have to complete your undergraduate degree before you enter the Pickering program. So timing wise, it would be helpful to know a little bit more about what is entailed with the fellowship program. And again, happy to respond to that in an email or in a phone call offline at a different point. And I did get a question to ask to talk a little bit more about the consular track. So I think just given the question, I might just talk about all of the career tracks. So the 5 career tracks of the Foreign Service include consular, management, public diplomacy, political, and economic. So I'll start with the consular because it is really the bread and butter of what the State Department does. State Department is really focused on the safety and security of the United States. So our consular fellows are the first line of contact that folks around the world have with the United States. They are the ones who process visa requests, permanent residency requests, and they also manage American citizen services overseas. So Americans might be traveling overseas, lose their passport, they would engage with our consular officers, or in more kind of unusual cases, not unusual to Foreign Service officers, but not ones that you may have necessarily heard of. Our consular officers are also managing issues with American citizens who might be living overseas as expats. The repatriating remains is something that comes up pretty often, or processing birth birth certificates for U.S. citizens who are born overseas. All of these are things that our consular officers would do. They would also visit folks who might be incarcerated overseas. They would be the first face that an American might see if they, for whatever reason, found themselves in jail overseas. So the Consular Track can offer a number of really interesting and rewarding career opportunities, because again, the day-to-day work of a consular officer is not ever the same. You encounter lots of different people, and again, because you are the first person that folks in these countries are communicating with on behalf of the government, you play an important role in giving kind of the first impression of what the U.S. government does, and having a wide range of consular officers at the window. It can be really important. Having a good experience with consular officers can mean a lot for someone who might be applying to a visa, or again, requesting other services in an embassy. And so we did get the question specifically about the consular track, but I will talk a little bit more about the other roles. So in addition to the consular track, we also have the management officers. Management officers are critical. You may not think about the Foreign Service as a way to get sort of managerial experience, but we need people who can keep the lights on at the embassies overseas. We need people who can hire folks. We need people who can manage motor pools and assets and real estate and that kind of thing. So our management officers are really critical to keeping the doors open at the embassies. We also have our political and our econ officers. I put them together in part because there is some overlap. Our political officers do work very closely with folks in government ministries in the countries where they're serving to work out agreements, whether that's trade agreements or whether or not it's policy and assistance agreements. Our econ officers work really to cultivate the local work with the local ministries to prime them to receive American businesses. So they really work really closely with American businesses, to encouraging them to come to the countries where they might be serving, and that kind of thing, and also working on trade agreements and things of that nature. And then we have our public diplomacy officers, and these are the folks that are out doing programming in the communities, talking to young people who might be interested in studying in the United States, and talking to them about what that looks like, working with Fulbright people who are working on serving as Fulbright recipients in that country, and really getting them engaged, and then also working with locals who might be interested in applying to the Fulbright programs to be here in the United States. Our public diplomacy officers are really the ones out engaging with folks in that community, and getting essentially building the profile of what it's like in the United States, essentially. So that's a little bit about the tracks. I might go ahead and move on just so that we can get into the sort of nuts and bolts of the application. So there are 3 core eligibility requirements to apply to the Pickering Fellowship Program. You must be a U.S. citizen at the time that you are applying to the program. You have to have a 3.2 GPA from your undergraduate institution. And you have to be seeking enrollment to a 2-year master's program in the fall of 2019 in a field of study relevant to the Foreign Service. And we've talked about the third component to some depth, so I'll leave that there. One of the frequent questions that we get about the GPA is, if I have a 3.18 or 3.17, am I still eligible to apply? And at this point, you are not. The 3.2 GPA is a hard stop with the GPA requirement. The one thing that I will mention is that if you transferred from a 2-year institution, for example, and your 2-year institution's GPA was, let's say, a 3.7, and then you transferred to a 4-year institution and you received like a 3.1 or a 3.0, we would combine those GPAs to come up with a cumulative GPA. And assuming that those 2 GPAs combined make a 3.2, then you would be eligible for the program. So 3 core requirements. In addition to meeting the basic requirements for the fellowship program, we ask for a whole host of other Other items, you will be required to submit a personal statement. This is a 600-word statement telling us about who you are, why it is that you're applying to the Pickering program specifically, but more importantly, why it is that you want to become a Foreign Service Officer. We also have a 400-word statement on your financial need. This is a need-based program, so our selection committee spends quite a bit of time looking at a number of data points on your financial need, which is why we ask for your student aid report generated by FAFSA and the financial aid award letter from your senior year. So those two items in combination with the questions that you see on the actual application related to your financial, to your income, to your and the debt that you might have, or awards that you may have received in undergrad, will all be taken into consideration. And then our selection committee will read the financial needs statement to get a better sense of what your current need is and why you might be looking to this program to apply that funding to your graduate program. If you did not receive aid as an undergrad, that does not preclude you from applying to the program. It just means that there might be different areas of need. So for example, one of the questions that we've had come up a couple of times is, well, I decided to go to this particular school because I received a scholarship that would allow me not to take out loans. So on paper, it looks like I didn't have a lot of expressed need from during undergrad. In the financial needs statement, you would definitely mention that. You would talk a little bit more about why it was that you chose that particular school, why it was that you thought the scholarship was important in making your decision, and that otherwise maybe you would have otherwise taken out some debt. So that's a little bit about the financial need, and I'll talk a little bit more in the tips about how you might approach the financial needs statement. So in addition to the statements and the financial information, we do also ask for 2 letters of recommendation, one from a faculty member or instructor, and then one from a community leader. So the faculty instructor letter of recommendation should be someone who can speak to your academic abilities and your potential for success in a graduate program. So we are really looking for this person to talk about whether or not they think that you're academically prepared to enter a master's program. The community leader is someone who can speak more about who you are as a person, maybe your commitment to public service, your interest in the foreign service or foreign affairs, international affairs more broadly speaking. This is really someone who can speak more to you as kind of the broader you. Who are you outside of the classroom? We will also ask for proof of citizenship, so you'll need to submit a copy of your passport, your birth certificate, or your certificate of naturalization. And then we will ask for your transcripts from all the colleges or universities that you've attended for more than a year. The question that often comes up with transcripts is, well, I went to another institution, but the grades are reflected in my transfer courses at my home institution. Do I still need to submit the other transcript? As long as the grades are clearly delineated on your current transcript, you do not need to submit the other transcript. But if you have the coursework, but the grades are not the grades associated with those courses are not listed, you will need to submit the transcript for the other institution. A common question that we're getting this year, because this is a change from previous years, is about the GRE or GMAT scores. Because of the timing of the application deadline, applicants are not required to submit a GRE or GMAT scores at the time of application. Certainly you would need to take it for the programs. Many of the programs that are listed even on our partner institutions list require GREs to be considered for their programs. So you will need to take it at some point, but they are not required for the purposes of reviewing the application. And then just to reiterate, our deadline is the 20th of September of this year. And I will take just a quick break to go back to some of the questions that we've been receiving. So for Wrangle, is very clear that if you don't fulfill requirements, GPA, passing the FSOs, you will likely have to pay back the funding you received. Does Pickering have the same policy? Yes. To clarify what that looks like, Many of you have noticed that the timing for the components for the Wrangle and the Pickering programs are the clear distinctions between the programs. The Pickering program, you don't do your first domestic internship until the summer in between your first and second year. And that's in large part to accommodate the longer clearance processes. In the case that a fellow does not receive suitability clearance, for example, which is often the last clearance that they receive, there is a payback requirement for the tuition and fees, but primarily with the internship component. So we don't do the domestic internship until after you've already started your graduate program, to allow that first summer with substantial time for our diplomatic security folks to get through the clearance processes. And most of our fellows do get through the clearance processes before they start graduate school. If, let's say, for example, you do not get your clearances before you start graduate school, you will have the option to defer receiving your tuition assistance until you receive that clearance, in the case that you're concerned that you may not receive your clearance in time, and you want to not be put in a position where you would have to make the repayments. That's also something that would be an option. But again, most of our fellows will receive the clearances that they need in time before they start graduate school. That's also a reason why the State Department has bumped up the timeline to September to match the Wrangle program, in part because clearances do take quite some time to get through, especially folks from diverse backgrounds who may have traveled extensively, have family in other parts of the world, or have had just lots of different experiences, maybe you've moved around a lot. That takes a little bit more time to interview folks to confirm that you've lived in those places. So that the timeline is also beneficial to the fellows, because the idea is that we will hopefully catch any of those items before you get to the point where you would have to repay. For the foreign service tests, I will say that that's a little bit different. You have up until until you are at the 5-year obligation point to pass the Foreign Service oral assessment. So you will be able to retake the Foreign Service oral assessment a number of times. Many of our fellows pass on if they were not able to pass on the first time, do often pass on the second time. And again, you receive support and mentorship all throughout the way to make sure that you are successful in passing the oral assessment. So good questions. So the other question that we have is, does the community leader specifically need to be public service related, or can it relate to other outside experiences? Yes, absolutely. It could be someone who can talk more about any number of experiences that you've had. So let's say you've had an advisor who knows you really well, who kind of knows what your personality is like, knows that you're really interested in international affairs, you've studied abroad, you've done these types of things, and can speak to that. Yes, absolutely. That could be someone. Or perhaps it's a supervisor from the job that you've held for some time, and they know your work ethic. They know that you are good with deadlines, good with customer service, those types of things. That would also be an appropriate letter of recommendation. So absolutely, even if they can't speak specifically to the public service, if they're noting things that would be important to the role of a foreign service officer, all the things that I mentioned, customer service, the responsibility, those types of things, yes, they would be in a good position to write a letter of recommendation. So timeline-wise, we've talked about the application process. I did not mention specifically, but in addition to the online application, our application process includes an interview. So the application is currently live and open. It will close on September 20th. And then in late October, our selection panels will meet. They will talk about the applications that they have reviewed, and then they will select 60 finalists who will be invited to interview in person here in Washington, D.C. We will pay for the flight from a domestic location in the United States to get to Washington, D.C. If you are based overseas at the time that the interviews are taking place, we will cover the cost for once you get onto U.S. soil. So let's say you're serving in Korea, you're doing a Fulbright in Korea. If you would get yourself to, let's say, LA, and then we would fly you from LA to Washington, D.C. We also cover one night at a hotel for the time that you're with us at the interviews. The interviews will take place on the 15th and the 16th. I apologize for the typo. It is the 15th and the 16th, a Thursday and a Friday of November. This is a week after the Wrangle interviews take place. So one of the questions that we've been getting this year is, well, if I'm accepted if I'm invited to interview for the Wrangle program, can I also be invited to interview for the Pickering? And yes, that's possible. If the selection panels are two completely separate processes. So in the case that someone does receive a finalist, an invitation to interview for both programs, we would consider you for both. If that said, once you've interviewed for the Wrangle program, if you receive the Wrangle program, then you have a couple of days to either confirm or wait until the Pickering program to Pickering interviews. You will either have to decide whether or not to accept the Wrangle or whether or not to continue on with the interviews with Pickering. If you do not accept the Wrangle, that position will be offered to someone else. So if you decide that you still want to keep trying with the Pickering program, you would have to, the space for the Wrangle slot would go to someone else, and you would have to wait until the Pickering process. But after the Pickering, let's say for some unusual reason you're not selected for the Pickering Fellowship, you would not be able to come back to the Wrangle offer, because again, we're trying to get as many people opportunities as possible. That said, if you're applying to one, you should absolutely apply to both. The programs provide very similar benefits. And if you're considering the Wrangle, you should absolutely apply for the Pickering. And if you're considering the Pickering, you should absolutely apply for the Wrangle. So our fellows will be our 30 fellows will be selected you'll receive notification by the 19th. We are hoping to get the notices out by the 16th, but we ask that you hold off to reach out to us until the 19th to make sure that we've gotten out all of the notices. And then the orientation for our fellows will take place in mid-June of next summer. So I might skip this just for timing's sake. I do want to leave enough time for questions and really get into the kind of heart of the application, some tips for what you might consider as you're looking to complete your application. So first and foremost, and this might seem intuitive or obvious, but it may not always, make sure that you're eligible for the application, that you're eligible at the time of applying to the program. If you are looking at graduate programs and you know that you want to get some work experience in between undergrad and graduate school, wait until you absolutely know that you're going to start applying to graduate school to apply. So if you're not looking to enroll in fall 2019, wait until the timing is right, where you would be looking to go to graduate school during that year. Also, I mentioned the 3.2 example, so make sure that you do meet the GPA requirements. The statement of interest is an interesting one. We often get questions about what really makes a personal statement stand out, and there are a couple of things that is to keep in mind as you're crafting your personal statement. This fellowship program is a hiring mechanism for the State Department, and they want to know that you've done some research on what Foreign Service officers do and what experience it is that the expectation is of our fellows to go in and serve as Foreign Service officers. If you're not completely certain that you want to be a Foreign Service officer, that will come through in your personal statement. So make sure that you're again keeping it focused on why it is that you are applying to the Pickering program, why it is that you're wanting to become a Foreign Service officer, what it is that you bring to the program. Why is it, in addition to why are you applying to the program, what is it that makes you uniquely positioned to take advantage of this program? How is this going to help you? But more importantly, how is this going to help the Foreign Service? The goal of both the Pickering and the Wrangle programs are to increase excellence and diversity in the Foreign Service. So speaking to what types of experiences that you bring that will make the Foreign Service more strongly representative of the United States, the experiences of the American experience, those are all things that you can certainly highlight here. Talk about any awards or honors that you've received, any extracurricular activities that you've been involved in. Again, we are looking for folks who are committed to public service. So if you've done any volunteering work, or maybe you've been really active and engaged on campus, highlight those things. If you've ever received a Dean's Award, highlight it. We want to know that you've been on the Dean's list. So definitely include that. One of the questions that often comes up with the specific this specific area of the application is, well, how in depth should I go with describing these? And because the text boxes in the application are pretty broad, they do allow for lots of characters. We're not looking for an additional essay, but definitely if you've received an award that's specific to your institution, use a sentence or two to describe what it is and what it entailed. If you received a merit scholarship award, talk about what what was it that made you competitive to get that award. So really highlight that. This is not an application where you want to be shy about highlighting your accomplishments. We want to see all of your accomplishments. In that same vein, we also do want to see your academic achievements and abilities. So our selection committee will go through each transcript and look at the types of coursework that you've taken, really looking at the letter of recommendation that's coming from the academic recommender to get a sense of who you are academically. Again, we are helping cover the costs of going to graduate school, so we want to know that you're able to succeed and be successful in a graduate program at the time that you're applying. In the same vein as recommenders, make sure that the recommenders can write a really strong letter on your behalf. It's incredible to see the range of recommendations that come in. Folks that we really want to see folks who can speak to you, provide clear examples of who you are and how they've worked with you. If you're trying to determine whether or not to ask your direct supervisor for a letter of recommendation, or the president and the CEO because you've met her once or twice, my recommendation would be to get the letter from the person who knows you best. So your direct supervisor would definitely be able to speak more to your work ethic, to the things that you've been able to accomplish in the time that you've worked with them, and that kind of thing. So make sure that the person can speak to you and why your strengths and why you're uniquely positioned to get into this program. We talked a little bit about the financial need. Again, this is a financial need based award. That's not to say that if you were not Pell eligible in undergrad that you would not be eligible to apply. Everybody has some financial need at this point because graduate school is an expensive endeavor, but we do look at a range of data points, again, with your financial needs. So that financial need statement is really important. So make sure that you're communicating to us why this award is important for you going to graduate school, what your current financial need is. Maybe you don't think that the numbers that are on the paper, on the student aid report or in your application reflect your current, your full financial need. Use the financial need statement to give us additional context for what your financial need really is. The other thing here too is, don't forget that the financial need statement is important for us to also understand your writing abilities. So make sure that you proofread that for grammar as well. Your personal statement, your financial needs statement, you should not be the only one looking at them. Always have someone else review them, because we miss things after you start to reread your material. You may not catch everything that might be there. So make sure that other folks are able to provide you with some feedback on that as well. So I'm going to pause here and go to the questions, because it looks like we have a couple of questions as well. If you're unable to apply for both, should we include the reason in our application? I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about why you might not be able to apply to both. The applications are pretty similar, so the material that we're asking for both is the same. The selection processes are completely separate. So in the case that you may not have the time to write the financial need statement, again, you could, in theory, use the same material. So I'd like to get a sense for why that might be, and we can talk about that offline. But if for most, my recommendation would be to focus on why it is that you are applying to the program. So really use the personal statement to tell us why it is that you want this particular program at this time. And not to focus so much on why other things are not necessarily working out. If chosen for an interview and accepted as a finalist, but for some reason we decided we don't want to join the program right away, will be penalized? No, you can, let's say timing wise something comes up and you received it, but the timing just isn't right. You can decline the award and come back and apply again the next year if you decide to. So no, that's a good question. And just as a note, we do have folks who may not make it through the first time and decide to come back and apply in a later year. You are welcome to do that. Again, because of the timing of the program, it actually works out to the benefit of the applicants who are submitting applications to the program, because you know well in advance of the application deadlines to graduate programs whether or not you've received the award. So you could hypothetically not receive the award and decide, well, I'll give it one more year and come back to apply, and you're definitely more than welcome to do that. So I am going to leave you all with our website and our email address. I'm assuming because you're here at the webinar that you have been to our website. Our website has lots of great information. We're updating it consistently, and we will probably have a few other pages up in the next couple of weeks that will provide additional information about what the typical experience is like for our fellows, and we'll also have a few fellow profiles posted as well. So again, I might leave just a moment if there are any other outstanding questions that folks had, but certainly don't want to keep you here longer than needed. I mentioned in the chat box that I will actually use the technical assistance webinar that's scheduled for the 27th, which is a Monday at 3 p.m. to also do a quick overview of the program. So that will be technical assistance and an overview, just to make sure that those who may not have been able to participate today are able to come back and participate in the live session. Again, thank you all for your patience. I really appreciate you sticking around to ask these really great questions. If you do have additional questions, please feel free at any time to shoot me an email, give me a call, and we can get those answered right away. Otherwise, I am very much looking forward to receiving your applications, and we'll look forward to receiving those. With that, this ends the formal part of our presentation, and I look forward to being in touch.